My name is Mia Bennett, and I am 34 years old, and what I am about to tell you is the story of the night I finally stopped being the punchline of my own family, and the night I learned that silence is not always weakness, and sometimes the quietest person at the table is the one holding all the cards. But before I take you inside that dining room, I need you to understand something. I need you to understand that what happened on that Christmas night did not happen in a vacuum. It was not one joke that went too far. It was not one dinner that spiraled out of control. It was the result of 34 years of pattern. 34 years of being the one who absorbs. 34 years of being the one who laughs along. 34 years of being the one who goes home and sits in her car in the driveway for 10 extra minutes because she is not ready to walk into an empty house and feel the weight of what just happened at the table. So when I tell you what I did that night, I need you to understand that it was not impulsive, it was not reactive, it was the most deliberate thing I have ever done in my life. And by the end of this story, you are going to understand exactly why. Let me take you back to the beginning. Not the Christmas dinner. Not yet. I need you to see the full picture first, because without the full picture, the ending does not hit the same way. I grew up in a house that looked perfect from the outside. My father, Robert Bennett, ran a mid-sized construction company in a town where everybody knew everybody. My mother, Linda, was the kind of woman who kept a spotless house and threw dinner parties that people talked about for weeks. My sister, Renata, was 3 years younger than me, and from the moment she could talk, she figured out that if she was loud enough and funny enough, she could get away with almost anything. And then there was me. The quiet one. The sensitive one. The one who cried too easily and laughed too softly and never quite learned the art of making people like her by being sharp and quick and just mean enough that it came across as charming. That was Renata's gift. She could say the cruelest thing in the room and make everyone laugh while she said it. And I could be on the receiving end of it, and if I even flinched, the whole table would look at me like I was the problem. Don't be so sensitive, Mia. It is just a joke. Renata does not mean anything by it. You know how she is. I heard those words so many times growing up that they stopped being words and became a kind of weather. The way you stop hearing rain after a while. It is just the background noise of your life. But here is the thing about background noise. It does not mean it is not doing damage. It just means you have stopped expecting anyone to turn it off. I want to tell you about the first time I realized my family had cast me in a role and had no intention of ever letting me out of it. I was 16 years old. It was Thanksgiving. My mother's sister, Aunt Sheila, had brought her new boyfriend, and everyone was on their best behavior, because that is what you do when there is a guest. You perform. You put on the Bennett family show. Happy family. Close family. No problems here. And Renata, who was 13 at the time, had just gotten her braces off and she was feeling particularly untouchable. She waited until the table was full. She waited until Aunt Sheila's boyfriend was mid-sentence, telling some story about his job. And she turned to me with this bright, cheerful smile and she said, "So Mia, have you ever actually been kissed? Or are you still waiting for someone to lower their standards enough?" The table laughed. Not everyone. My father did not laugh. He just looked at his plate. But my mother laughed, and Aunt Sheila laughed, and my cousin Dana, who was 15 and already idolized Renata, laughed the loudest. And Aunt Sheila's boyfriend laughed too because he did not know any better. He thought this was what this family did. He thought this was love. I did not cry. Not at the table. I had already learned by 16 that crying at the table was the worst thing you could do, because then you became the one who ruined the mood. You became the one who could not take a joke. You became the burden. So I smiled. I said something like, "Oh, you know me," always keeping my standards high. And everyone laughed again, and the moment passed, and Thanksgiving continued, and nobody ever mentioned it again. But I remember it. I remember it the way you remember the first time someone touches a bruise you did not know you had. Not because the touch was violent, because the surprise of the pain tells you the bruise was there all along. That was the first time. It was not the last. Over the years, Renata refined her craft. She never yelled. She never screamed. She never said anything that could be quoted back to her as cruel. She was too smart for that. She learned to wrap every insult in a laugh, and every knife in a smile, and every attack in the shape of a question. "So Mia, how is the job search going?" Any luck, or are you still figuring things out? So Mia, are you still doing that little hobby of yours? What do you call it? Writing? That is so cute. So Mia, I noticed you gained a little weight. Are you eating okay? I'm just worried about you. Always worried. Always concerned. Always just looking out for me. And always in front of an audience. Because that was the key. Renata never did it in private. She never pulled me aside and said something hurtful one-on-one. She only ever did it at the table. At Thanksgiving. At Christmas. At birthdays. At any gathering where there were enough people to laugh and not enough people to defend me. And my mother was the other half of the equation, because every single time, without exception, my mother did the same thing. She smoothed it over. She redirected. She smiled that warm, practiced smile that she had perfected over decades of keeping the peace in a house where peace meant silence and silence meant nobody has to change. She is just joking, Mia. You know how Renata is. Do not make a scene. Do not make a scene. As if my reaction to being humiliated was the scene, as if the humiliation itself was just normal, as if the problem was never the cruelty but always the person who refused to absorb it quietly. I want you to sit with that for a moment because this is important. I need you to really understand what it is like to grow up in a house where the cruelty is normal and the reaction to cruelty is the problem. Because that is not just a family dynamic. That is a system. A carefully maintained system where one person is designated as the one who takes it and everyone else gets to feel good about themselves because at least they are not the one being laughed at. And I was the one who took it. For years. For decades. I took it, and I smiled, and I went home, and I sat in my car, and I breathed through it, and I told myself it did not matter. That Renata did not mean it, that my mother did not see it, that my father did not know how to stop it. But the truth was simpler than any of that. The truth was that nobody wanted to stop it because stopping it would mean admitting something was wrong. And admitting something was wrong would mean the Bennett family was not the happy, perfect family everyone pretended to be. So I absorbed, year after year, holiday after holiday, joke after joke, until one night everything changed. But I am getting ahead of myself. Because before I tell you about the Christmas night that changed everything, I need to tell you about Julian. I met Julian Ashworth almost 4 years before that Christmas dinner. I was 30 years old. I was working as a project coordinator for a nonprofit that organized educational conferences for women in construction and architecture. It was not glamorous work. It was not the kind of job my family bragged about at parties. My father ran a construction company, and my sister was married to a dentist and had 2 kids and a house with a pool, and in the Bennett family hierarchy that mattered more than anything I was doing. But I loved my work. I loved being around women who were building things. I loved the energy of people who had fought for their place in industries that did not want them. And I loved the conferences because for 3 days at a time I got to be in a room where nobody was laughing at me. The conference where I met Julian was in Chicago, a mid-sized event, maybe 200 attendees. I was running the registration table and trying to fix a problem with the name badges because the printing company had switched the first and last names on every single badge, and I was standing behind a table surrounded by 200 incorrectly printed name tags, trying to figure out how to hand someone a badge that said Bennett Mia instead of Mia Bennett, without it being awkward. And this man walked up, tall, dark hair, glasses, the kind of face that looked serious until he smiled and then it looked like a completely different person. He looked at the badge I handed him. He looked at it for a long second, and then he looked at me and he said, "Ashworth Julian, should I wear it backwards, or is there a creative solution I am missing?" And I laughed. Not a polite laugh. Not the kind of laugh I had trained myself to produce at family dinners. A real laugh. The kind that comes out before you can decide whether it is appropriate. That was the first thing Julian ever did for me. He made me laugh without trying. Without a punchline at my expense. Without an audience waiting to see if I could take it. He was there representing his family's firm. The Ashworth Group. A larger construction and development company that had started as a small operation decades ago and had grown into something significant. He was not the kind of person I expected to meet at a small nonprofit conference. He was not the kind of person I expected to connect with at all. But we talked. We stood at that registration table for 40 minutes while people streamed past us picking up their backwards name badges, and we talked about everything. About construction. About architecture. About growing up in families that had expectations you could never quite meet. About what it is like to be the quiet one in a room full of loud people. And when I said that, he looked at me and he said, "You are not quiet. You are just in the wrong room." Nobody had ever said that to me before. Nobody had ever framed my silence as a product of my environment rather than a flaw in my character. Nobody had ever suggested that the problem was not me, but the place I was trying to exist in. We exchanged numbers, not business numbers, personal numbers. And he texted me that night to ask if I had survived the badge crisis, and I texted back that I had, and that was the beginning. I want to tell you that it was easy from the start. That we fell in love over candlelit dinners and long walks and movie moments. But it was not like that. It was slow. It was careful. It was two people who had both been shaped by families that had strong opinions about who they should be and what they should want. And we both moved slowly because we had both learned that the things you care about most are the things that get taken from you first. We dated for almost a year before I told him about my family. Not the surface version. The real version. The Renata version. The Christmas dinner version. The 16-year-old at Thanksgiving version. The years of being the punchline. The years of smiling through it. The years of my mother saying, "Do not be so sensitive." I told him all of it. Sitting on his couch on a Sunday afternoon with a cup of tea getting cold in my hands because I was too busy talking to drink it. I told him everything, and I waited for him to do what most people do, which is minimize it. Say it is not that bad. Say all families are like that. Say she probably does not mean it. He did not do any of those things. He set his cup down. He looked at me for a long moment, and he said, "You know that is not normal, right? What they do to you is not normal. A family that loves you does not use you as entertainment." And I started crying. Not because it was the first time someone had said that, but because it was the first time someone had said it, and I actually believed them. Because it was coming from someone who had no stake in minimizing it. No stake in keeping the system running. No stake in maintaining the story that everything was fine in the Bennett house. That was the moment I fell in love with Julian Ashworth. Not when he made me laugh at the registration table. Not when he texted me about the badge crisis. But when he looked at me and told me the truth about my own life, and I could see in his eyes that it made him angry. Not at me. For me. There is a difference. And if you have ever been on the receiving end of someone being angry for you for the first time, you know exactly what I mean. It is the most disorienting and validating feeling in the world. Because you have spent your whole life being told that the anger is the problem, that your reaction is the problem, that you are too sensitive. And then someone comes along and says, "No, the problem is what they are doing to you, and you should be angry about it. And the fact that you are not is a sign of how much they have trained you to accept it." That was Julian. Now here's where the story gets complicated. And I need you to pay close attention because this is where the threads start to cross and the thing that nobody at that Christmas table saw coming starts to take shape. About a year and a half into our relationship, my father's construction company hit a wall. A big one. He had bid on a major contract. A commercial development project that would have been the biggest job his company had ever landed. He had been working on the bid for months. He had poured resources into it. He had taken out loans to cover the pre-development costs. He was all in. And the contract went to a larger firm, the Ashworth Group. My father was devastated. Not just financially, emotionally. This was not just a lost contract. This was proof of something he had always feared, which was that the small guy gets crushed and the big guy does not even notice. He did not just lose the contract. He lost the narrative. He lost the story he told himself about hard work and fair competition and earning your place. And he needed someone to blame. The Ashworths became the villain of the Bennett family story. My father raged about them at every dinner. My mother nodded along. Renata, who had never met an Ashworth in her life and could not have picked Julian out of a lineup, suddenly had strong opinions about that family and their business practices and their ethics. I sat at the table and I listened. I listened to my father say the Ashworths buried him in lawyers. I listened to him say they did not care who they crushed. I listened to him describe them as soulless and ruthless and every other word he could reach for that made them less human and more monster. And the entire time I was dating one of them, I never said a word. Not because I was ashamed. Not because I thought I was doing something wrong. But because I knew this family. I knew them the way you know the weather patterns of the place you grew up. I knew that if I told them I was dating Julian Ashworth, it would not matter that we had been together for a year before the contract dispute ever happened. It would not matter that Julian had nothing to do with the bid. It would not matter that the contract went to the Ashworth Group on the merits of the bid, and not because of some personal vendetta against my father. None of that would matter because this family did not deal in facts. This family dealt in feelings and narratives and roles, and the role they had already assigned to the Ashworths was villain. If I walked in and said, I am in love with a villain, they would not reconsider the label, they would reconsider me. I would become the daughter who sided with the enemy, the sister who betrayed the family, the one who chose them over us. And my mother would smooth it over with her practiced smile, and my father would rage, and Renata would make jokes, and the whole thing would become another version of the same pattern. Mia, the disappointment. Mia, the problem. Mia, the one who could not get anything right. So I stayed quiet. I protected what I had built with Julian the way you protect a candle in a storm. You cup your hands around it, you do not wave it around. You wait for the wind to die down. Except the wind never died down, it just kept blowing. Julian and I got more serious, we moved in together. He met my friends, he met my colleagues. He became part of a life that had nothing to do with the Bennett family dining room. I built a world that was entirely separate from the world I grew up in. A world where nobody called me sensitive. A world where nobody used me as entertainment. A world where the person I loved actually saw me and did not flinch at what he saw. And then, about 2 years into our relationship, Julian asked me to marry him. It was not a grand gesture. It was not a rooftop, or a beach, or a flash mob, or any of the things you see in movies. It was a Tuesday night. We were sitting on the couch. I was reading a book, and he was pretending to read a book, but I could tell he was not reading because he had not turned a page in 20 minutes, and he kept looking at me and looking away. And finally, he put the book down, and he said I had been trying to figure out the right way to do this, and I realized there is no right way, there is just the honest way. I want to spend my life with you, not because you are perfect. Because you are honest, and you are brave, and you have survived things that would have made most people bitter, and you are still kind. That is the rarest thing I have ever seen in a person. And I do not want to spend another day not calling you my wife. He had a ring. A simple one. Not flashy. Not loud. Just like him. I said yes. And I cried. And he held me. And for the first time in my life, I felt what it is like to be chosen. Not as a joke. Not as a cautionary tale. Not as the one who settles for less. But as someone worth building a life with. We got married 3 months later. A small ceremony, 12 guests. My closest friends. His closest friends. His parents who were warm and kind and who hugged me like I was already theirs. My family was not there. Not because I did not want them there. Because I knew that if they were there, the day would not be about me and Julian. It would be about the contract dispute. It would be about the enemy. It would be about Renata making a joke during the bows, or my mother smiling through her discomfort, or my father sitting in the corner, stewing. I wanted one day that was just mine. One day that was not performative. One day that was not the Bennett family show. And I got it. And it was the happiest day of my life. For 3 years, I lived a double life. At work, and with my friends, I was Mia Ashworth. Married, happy, loved. Part of a partnership that made me feel like I was finally breathing with both lungs instead of one. At family dinners, I was still Mia Bennett, the single one, the lonely one. The one was my mother, could point at and say 35, and still single, and everyone would laugh. And every time I sat at that table and absorbed another joke, I thought about Julian at home waiting for me. I thought about how he would look at me when I walked through the door and say how was it, And I would say fine, and he would know it was not fine, and he would not push, because he had learned that pushing was what my family did. And he was not going to be another person who made me explain my pain on their timeline. He just made me tea. He sat next to me. He let the silence be the thing that healed instead of the thing that punished. 3 years of that. 3 years of holding the truth at the table and letting it out at home. 3 years of being two people and knowing which one was real and which one was the costume. And then came the Christmas that broke everything open. The Christmas table was set with the same red tablecloth my mother used every year. The same mismatched wine glasses. The same candle centerpiece that had survived 3 house moves. I sat between my Aunt Sheila and my sister Renata holding a glass of white wine I had not touched in 20 minutes because I already knew where the night was heading. I knew because I had been to this exact dinner 100 times before. Different food, same dynamics, same roles, same script. And I had always played my part. The quiet one. The one who takes it. The one who goes home and sits in her car and breathes through it. But this time something was different. This time I was not carrying the weight alone. This time I had something inside me that no one at that table knew about. Something that changed the entire equation. Something that made me invincible in a way none of them could see. I just had not decided yet whether I was going to use it. Renata had that look. The one she got right before she said something and pretended it was a joke. She had had 2 glasses of Prosecco already, and her voice always got sharper after the second glass, like the alcohol sanded down whatever filter she normally had. Like the kindness she was capable of when no one was watching got dissolved by the wine. And what was left was just the weapon she had been sharpening since she was 13. My father was carving the turkey at the head of the table. My mother was refilling bowls of mashed potatoes. My nephew was building a tower out of dinner rolls. The room smelled like rosemary and butter and the pine candles my mother bought every December. And Renata set her fork down and turned to me with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "So Mia," she said, tilting her head. 35 and still single. Christmas must get pretty lonely for you." The table went quiet for half a second. And then it did not. Uncle Pete let out a short laugh first. And then my cousin Dana snorted into her napkin. And then it spread down the table like a wave. Everyone chuckling like Renata had just delivered the punchline of the century. Like this was the entertainment. Like the family show needed its annual highlight reel and I was it. I felt my face go warm. Not from embarrassment exactly. More from the familiar sting of being the family's favorite target dressed up as a joke. The way you feel when you touch something hot and your body reacts, before your mind catches up. Not surprise. Just the body remembering what the mind has tried to forget. This was not new. Renata had been doing this since we were teenagers. Poking at whatever insecurity she thought I had that year. And every year someone at that table decided it was funny. Every year my mother decided it was not worth addressing. Every year my father decided his plate was more interesting than his daughter's dignity. I looked at my mother, waiting for her to do what mothers are supposed to do. Which is shut it down. Which is say that is enough, Renata. Which is say we do not talk to each other that way in this family. Instead, she smiled. That warm practice smile she used when she wanted to smooth things over without actually addressing anything. And she said she is just joking, Mia. Do not be so sensitive. Do not be so sensitive. I had heard that phrase more times in my life than I could count. And every single time it was code for something. It was code for stop making other people uncomfortable with your discomfort. It was code for your pain is an inconvenience. It was code for we have decided this is normal and your refusal to accept it is the only abnormal thing in this room. My mother had never once in 34 years told Renata to stop. She had only ever told me to stop reacting. She had only ever told me to stop feeling. She had only ever told me to stop being the thing that I could not stop being, which was a person who was hurt by being hurt. I could have raised my voice. I could have thrown down my napkin and stormed off like something out of a soap opera, the kind of scene that would have given Renata exactly what she wanted. More attention. More drama. More proof that I was the emotional one who could not take a joke. More proof that the problem was me and not the knife she just put in my ribs. I could have done all of that. Instead, I did something quieter. I set my wine glass down on the table, slow and deliberate, the base clinking softly against the wood, the sound small enough that everyone at the table heard it because it was the only sound in a room that had suddenly stopped laughing. And I looked directly at my sister. "Do not worry about me," I said, my voice calm. Almost pleasant. The kind of voice that sounds like it is about to say something reassuring and then does not. "I have been married for a long time." The table did not laugh this time. My mother, who had been mid-motion raising her own glass for a toast to the meal, froze completely, her arms suspended in the air like someone had hit pause on her. Like the scene had been frozen in amber and she was trapped inside it. Renata's smile cracked at the corners, confusion flickering across her face because in her mind she had the story straight. I was the sad, lonely spinster sister. The cautionary tale she liked to hold up next to her own marriage and her 2 kids and her house with the pool. I was the before picture. I was the warning. I was the thing you did not want to end up like. A married sister did not fit anywhere into that story. "What are you talking about?" Renata asked, her laugh coming out thin and unsure now, like she was trying to maintain the performance but the stage had shifted under her. "Since when are you married? You never said anything." I let the silence sit there for a moment before answering. Because for the first time in years I was not the one scrambling to explain myself at that table. For the first time, the silence was not my burden, it was theirs. 3 years, I said simply. You never asked. And here's where I need you to pay attention, because this is the moment where the room splits in half. This is the moment where the story goes from uncomfortable to something else entirely. Something that nobody at that table was prepared for. Something that was going to reframe everything they thought they knew about the quiet sister who never fought back. My father had stopped carving the turkey entirely, the knife resting midair in his hand. His eyes going between me and my mother like he was trying to figure out if this was a joke too. Except nobody was laughing, and nobody looked like they were about to. My mother lowered her glass slowly, the toast forgotten, her expression shifting from confusion to something closer to alarm. Like someone who has just heard a sound in the house at 2 a.m. and is trying to decide if it is the wind or something worse. "Mia," she said carefully. "When was my sister Rome family you got married?" I picked my wine glass back up, finally taking a sip, letting the question hang there because the answer was sitting right in front of all of us. Wrapped in red tablecloth and mashed potatoes and 34 years of being the family joke. I had not told them, because for the first time in my adult life, I had built something that was entirely mine. Something Renata could not twist into a punchline. Something my mother could not smooth over with a practiced smile. Something my father could not rage about without sounding like a fool. I had not told them because I was protecting what I had built from the people who had spent my whole life tearing down everything I tried to build. And now, sitting there in the quiet aftermath of my sister's failed joke, I realized the real story was not going to stay hidden much longer, because my mother's face told me she already suspected. She already suspected exactly who I had married, and she was right to be afraid of what came next. My mother's silence stretched long enough that my father finally set the carving knife down completely. And Renata, still holding her half-empty Prosecco glass, looked between us like she was watching a scene she did not have the script for. Like someone had handed her a role in a play she had never rehearsed, and the lights were already up and the audience was already watching. I let the moment breathe, because for years I had been the one scrambling for words at this table. For years I had been the one trying to fill the silence before it swallowed me. For years I had been the one who spoke first, because speaking first meant you were trying and trying meant you cared, and caring meant you were weak. Now it was someone else's turn. "His name is Julian," I said finally. "Julian Ashworth. And I want you to understand what happened in that room when I said that name. Because it was not just a name. It was a detonation. It was the moment where every thread I had been holding for 3 years came together in a single sentence, and every person at that table felt it at the same time. The name landed like a stone dropped into still water. My mother's face went pale. I watched her hand tighten around the stem of her wine glass, her knuckles going white, her lips parting slightly like she wanted to say something, but the words had turned to stone in her throat. My father's jaw clenched, a muscle in his cheek twitching. his hands flat on the table on either side of his plate like he was trying to steady himself against something that was trying to push him backwards. And even Renata, who moments ago had been laughing at my supposed loneliness. Renata, who had been so secure in her position as the successful married sister with the perfect life. Renata now looked like she had swallowed something bitter. Something that was sitting at the back of her throat, and she could not decide whether to swallow it down or let it out. Julian was not just any name in our family's history. 3 years ago, my father's construction business had nearly collapsed after a contract dispute with a much larger firm, one owned by the Ashworth family. And my father had spent months telling anyone who would listen how the Ashworths had buried him in lawyers and did not care who they crushed. He had told the story so many times that it had become family lore. It had become part of the Bennett identity. The Ashworths were not just a business rival, they were the enemy. They were the reason Robert Bennett was not as successful as he should have been. They were the shadow that fell across every dinner and every holiday and every conversation about the future of the company. I remembered sitting in the same dining room, listening to my father rage about it, watching my mother nod along, both of them certain the Ashworths were the villains of our family's story, Renata chiming in with her own secondhand outrage, everyone performing their role in the narrative, the brave father wronged by the powerful enemy, the loyal family standing behind him, the collective outrage that gave them all something to bond over. And the whole time I was sitting in that same chair, holding my tongue and holding the hand of one of those supposed villains under a table they did not know existed. What none of them knew was that I had met Julian almost 4 years ago at a conference neither of them cared to remember, long before that contract dispute ever happened, long before the Ashworth name became a curse word in the Bennett household. Our relationship had nothing to do with business and everything to do with two people who genuinely liked each other. Two people who had been shaped by families with strong opinions and who had found in each other the one person who did not need them to perform. When the dispute erupted, I had made a choice. I chose to keep my personal life separate from my father's grudge, not because I was ashamed, but because I knew exactly how this family treated things they did not approve of. I had watched them do it to Renata's college boyfriend who was too quiet. I had watched them do it to my cousin's fiancé who had the wrong job. I had watched them do it to anyone who did not fit the mold they had built in their heads. So I stayed quiet. I got married quietly in a small ceremony with 12 guests, none of whom were sitting at this table. And I let my family believe I was still the same lonely single Mia they loved to joke about. For 3 years I let them believe it. For 3 years I sat at this table and absorbed their jokes and their pity and their condescension. For 3 years I smiled when I should have screamed, and I nodded when I should have stood up, and I stayed quiet when I should have said his name. And now I had said it, and the room was breaking apart. "You married into the family that nearly destroyed us," my father said, his voice low. More disbelief than anger, though the anger was clearly building underneath it, like a fire that had been banked and was now catching air. "You married into the family that took food off our table, that nearly put me out of business, that kept me awake for months. And you did not tell us? They did not destroy us, Dad," I said evenly. "The contract fell through because our bid was underpriced and the numbers did not work, not because anyone was out to get you." I read the paperwork, I know the difference. My father looked at me like I had slapped him. Not because I was wrong, because I was right and he knew I was right, and he had spent 3 years building a story that did not include that fact. He had spent 3 years turning a business loss into a personal betrayal because personal betrayal was easier to carry than professional failure. It was easier to be the victim of a villain than the architect of his own miscalculation. And I had just pulled the curtain back. My mother set her glass down hard enough that it rattled against her plate, the sound sharp in the silent room, like a gunshot in a library. "So all this time," she said, "while your father was losing sleep over that mess, while your father was falling apart, while this family was suffering, you were sleeping with the enemy?" I looked at her. I looked at her for a long time, longer than she was comfortable with. Long enough that she shifted in her chair and looked away, and then looked back because she could not help herself, because she needed to know what I was going to say next. I was building a life, I said. And for the first time all evening, my voice had an edge to it, sharp enough that Renata actually flinched. Not because I raised it, because I did not raise it. Because the edge was in the clarity, in the steadiness, in the fact that I was not scrambling, I was not defending, I was not explaining, I was telling them. Everyone at this table was busy deciding I was pathetic for being single. I was married to a man who respects me more than anyone in this room ever has. While Renata was making jokes about my Christmas being lonely, I was spending it with a family that has never once made me feel small. One was my Sibling and misunderstandings family show. I was living a life that does not require a performance. And I did not tell you because I knew exactly what you would do with it. The same thing you do with everything. You would turn it into a joke or a betrayal or a reason to feel sorry for yourselves, and I was not going to let you do that to the one good thing I have ever built for myself. The table was dead silent now. The kind of silence that used to terrify me as a kid. The silence right before someone got in trouble. Except, this time, I was not the one in trouble. And everyone at that table knew it. Renata's face had gone from smug to something closer to humiliated, because in one speech I had taken the exact insult she had thrown at me and turned it back on the entire family sitting around that turkey. I had taken her punchline and made it the setup. I had taken the role she had assigned me and refused to play it. And now she was the one sitting there with nothing to say. She was the one without the script. She was the one who had to figure out what to do with her face and her hands and her half-empty Prosecco glass in a room that had turned against her. My nephew, still oblivious, kept stacking dinner rolls like nothing in the world had shifted, and honestly I envied him for it. I envied the innocence of a person who had not yet learned that the people who love you can also be the ones who hurt you most. I envied the fact that he still thought the table was just a table, and the food was just food, and the people around him were just people. He would learn, they all do. My mother finally spoke again. Quieter this time. Almost pleading. Her voice stripped of the practiced warmth, stripped of the performance. Just a woman sitting across from her daughter realizing too late that the distance between them was not something that had happened to them, but something they had built. Why would you not just tell us, Mia? We are your family. I looked at her for a long moment before answering. I looked at her and I saw 34 years of do not be so sensitive. I saw 34 years of she is just joking. I saw 34 years of watching me get hurt, and choosing the person hurting me over the person being hurt. I saw a mother who loved me in the way that a gardener loves a plant. As long as it grows in the direction she wants. As long as it does not get too tall or too wide or too different from what she planted. Because every time I have ever brought someone home, this family found a way to make them feel unwelcome. And every time someone laughed at my expense, you smiled and told me not to be sensitive. I did not hide my marriage because I was ashamed of it. I hid it because I was protecting it from all of you. And there it was. The thing I had been carrying for 3 years. The thing I had been holding at the bottom of every glass of wine I did not drink at. Every dinner I did not want to be at. The truth that had been sitting under the red tablecloth like a landmine, waiting for someone to step on it. I was protecting my marriage from my family. Not from strangers. Not from the world. From the people who were supposed to love me most. From the people who were supposed to be the safe place. From the people who were supposed to be the ones I ran to when things were hard, not the ones I ran from. And every person at that table heard it, and every person at that table knew it was true. And not one of them could say a single word because what do you say when your daughter looks at you and tells you that she built an entire secret life to keep you away from the one thing that made her happy? What do you say when you realize that the joke you have been telling for 34 years was never a joke to the person it was about? What do you say when the curtain falls and the show is over and the audience is gone and you are left looking at the person you have been using as entertainment and you see for the first time that she is a whole person with a whole life that you were never part of? Nobody said anything after that. My father stared at his plate, his jaw still tight, his hands still flat on the table. But his eyes, His eyes had something in them that I had never seen before. Not anger, not denial. Something closer to the moment right before a man realizes he has been wrong for a very long time and does not know how to start being right. My mother's eyes were glassy, somewhere between shame and shock. Somewhere between the woman who had spent 34 years keeping the peace and the woman who was now realizing that the peace she kept was never peace at all. It was just the absence of her daughter's voice. And the absence of her daughter's voice was not the same as the presence of her daughter's happiness. Renata just sat there. Prosecco glass forgotten. The joke she had been so proud of 30 minutes earlier, now sitting like a stone in the middle of the table that nobody wanted to touch. Her face was doing something I had never seen it do. It was still. It was not performing. It was not preparing the next line. It was just a face. A human face belonging to a woman who had just been shown the cost of every laugh she had ever directed at her sister. I do not know if she felt guilty. I do not know if my father felt ashamed. I do not know if my mother understood the full weight of what she had done over 34 years of telling me not to be sensitive. What I know is that for the first time in my life the table was quiet, and I was not afraid of the quiet. I was not scrambling to fill it. I was not strangling inside it. I was sitting in it. I was owning it. I was letting the silence be the thing that said everything I had spent 34 years trying to say with words that nobody ever listened to. I finished my wine. I stood up. I thanked my mother for dinner. Calm and steady. Not dramatic. Not theatrical. Not the storming out that Renata would have loved, because it would have given her something to talk about for the next year. Just a woman standing up from a table where she had spent her whole life being diminished, and walking toward the door with her head high, and nothing left unsaid. My mother said something as I reached the doorway. My name. Just my name. Mia. The way she used to say it when I was small, and she wanted me to come back. The way she said it when I was running too far ahead on the sidewalk, and she was afraid I would reach the street before she could catch me. I stopped. I turned. I looked at her, and for a moment, just a moment, I saw it. I saw the woman underneath the performance. The woman who had spent so many years maintaining the illusion of the happy family that she had forgotten the difference between happiness and appearance. The woman who had told me not to be sensitive because she was too sensitive herself to face what sensitivity would reveal. I did not say anything. I did not need to. The silence said it. The look said it. The 34 years said it. I walked out of that house and I drove home, and when I opened the door, Julian was there. On the couch, a book in his hands, a cup of tea on the table. He looked up, and he did not ask how it went. He just looked at my face, and he knew. He always knew. He made room on the couch. I sat down. He put his arm around me. I leaned into him. And for the first time in 34 years, I sat in a silence that did not hurt. A silence that was not punishment. A silence that was just two people being in the same room and not needing to perform. That was the night I stopped being the punchline. Not because I said something devastating. Not because I won the argument, but because I finally understood that the power was never in the comeback. The power was in the truth. The power was in the fact that I had built a life so full and so real and so mine that the jokes could not touch it anymore. The jokes were still there. Renata was still there. The table was still there. But I was somewhere else now. I was in a place they could not reach. A place they did not know existed. A place I had built in secret, and in silence, and in love. And that place was home. If you have ever sat at a table where your own family made you the punchline, you already know how powerful it feels to finally take your power back. If you have ever been told you are too sensitive by the same people who should have been protecting you. If you have ever hidden something beautiful because you were afraid the people around you would find a way to ruin it. If you have ever smiled through a joke that was not a joke and gone home and sat in your car and breathed through it and told yourself it did not matter, you know exactly what I am talking about. And I want you to know something. It gets better. Not because they change. They might never change. Renata might make another joke next Christmas. My mother might tell me not to be sensitive for the 500th time. My father might never apologize. They might stay exactly who they are. But you change, you grow, you build. You find people who do not need you to perform. You find rooms where your silence is not a problem. You find a home that is not built on a punchline. And one day, you sit at a table and you are not afraid anymore. Not because the fear is gone, but because you have something they cannot take away. If this story hit home for you, I want you to do 3 things right now. Hit that subscribe button because this is a community of people who have been where you have been and who are building something better. Leave a like because it tells the algorithm to put this story in front of someone else who might need to hear it tonight. And leave a comment. Tell me your story. Tell me about the table you sat at. Tell me about the joke that was not a joke. Tell me about the moment you finally said the thing you had been holding for years. Because your story matters. And someone reading it tonight might need to see it to know they are not alone. You are not alone. You were never the problem, and the life you are building in silence is going to be the loudest thing they ever heard.